Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're looking into the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan
Oh, yeah.
and all the weapons that were left behind,
Right.
and specifically how all this is impacting Pakistan. So
Yeah.
we've got a whole stack of articles and research right here, ready to go.
Yeah, this is fascinating stuff. It's a complicated situation.
Definitely.
We're talking billions of dollars worth of military equipment.
Billions, yeah.
That's quite a wild card in the region.
It really is. And it's not just what they left behind,
Yeah.
but what they asked for after the fact. The Taliban actually asked the U.S. for more weapons after they took over.
Yeah, you would think that wouldn't be the first thing on their shopping list.
Right.
But when you think about it from their point of view,
Yeah.
it kind of makes sense.
Okay, so help me understand this. What was their angle?
Well, to understand that, we have to go back to the withdrawal itself.
Okay.
August 2021.
Right.
A deal was made during the Trump administration, and then it was carried out by the Biden administration.
Yeah.
It was pretty chaotic. There's a lot of criticism,
Why?
especially after what happened at the Kabul airport and that horrible suicide bombing.
Oh, absolutely. Those images are just burned into everyone's memory.
Yeah.
But amidst all that chaos,
Yeah.
tons of military equipment was abandoned, like billions of dollars worth.
Yeah. A staggering $7 billion worth of equipment was left behind. Small arms,
Wow.
artillery pieces,
Wow.
helicopters, even some aircraft. The U.S. tried to destroy some of it,
Oh, okay.
but obviously a lot of it ended up in the hands of the Taliban.
And then Trump demands they give it all back, and they just said no.
They refused.
Yeah.
It was a bold move.
It was.
I mean, you have to remember at that point, the Taliban were trying to solidify their control.
Right.
They wanted to protect strength. But they also had internal threats, too, including ISIS.
Okay.
So they said they needed more weapons to fight ISIS.
Oh.
Basically trying to present themselves as the only thing standing between Afghanistan and more instability.
So they're trying to look like the responsible ones.
Exactly.
Did anyone buy it, though?
Let's just say the international community was a little skeptical,
Okay.
especially Pakistan.
Yeah, Pakistan is right next to Afghanistan.
Right.
And they've always been worried about problems spilling over.
Yeah, but this is different.
How so?
This isn't just about little fights at the border or political arguments.
Okay.
Pakistan's Foreign Office was very clear about their profound concern over these weapons and the risk of them falling into the wrong hands.
Right.
And they're directly linking the weapons to an increase in terrorist attacks in Pakistan.
And they're saying it's Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan, the TTP, who are behind these attacks.
Yeah, the TTP is a terrorist group that's active in the region.
Right.
And Pakistan says they're using these weapons to carry out attacks.
And we're not just talking about basic rifles.
No. This is serious stuff. We're talking night vision goggles,
Oh,
sophisticated communications equipment,
really?
maybe even anti-aircraft systems.
That's a game changer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is the kind of gear that could make a group like the TTP much more dangerous.
So not just more weapons, but better weapons.
Yeah, and that's why experts like Dr. Hassan Abbas, who's a leading expert on terrorism and security, are saying that the U.S. withdrawal created a power vacuum,
Yeah.
which militant groups are now trying to fill.
Yeah.
And all these abandoned weapons,
Yeah.
well, it's like pouring gasoline on a fire.
And it's not just experts and think tanks that are worried about this.
No.
Retired Brigadier General Assad Munir, who spent years working in counterterrorism, is saying the same thing.
Yeah, he's saying that Pakistan is facing a much bigger threat now because of these weapons.
Okay, so this is a really big deal. And it's not just contained to Afghanistan either.
Absolutely. What happens in Afghanistan doesn't stay in Afghanistan.
Right, it's all connected.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It has consequences for the whole region and maybe even beyond that.
So what are the consequences? What does this mean for the region's security?
Well, that's where someone like Dr. Marvin Weinbaum comes in.
Who's that?
He's a big name in regional security, and he's got some pretty grim predictions.
Oh, okay, I'm listening.
He says that there's a real chance of increased terrorism and instability across the whole region, all because of this power vacuum and because there's so many weapons just lying around.
It's like a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, I know. It's
So what now?
not looking good.
Is there any way out of this mess?
It's a good question. The research we've got here does mention a few possible solutions.
Okay.
But they all have their own problems.
Well, let's hear them. I'm open to anything at this point.
Okay, well, the first one is pretty simple, at least in theory.
Okay.
International support for the Afghan people.
Okay.
I mean, they're facing a humanitarian crisis on a massive scale. Decades of conflict.
Yeah.
Then a sudden change in government economic collapse. It's a terrible situation.
Well, even imagine.
They don't have enough food or medicine. and the education system is falling apart,
Yeah,
they need help.
I'm not surprised.
And this isn't just about being nice or charitable.
No?
It's a strategic move.
Yeah,
When people are desperate, they're more likely to join extremist groups.
that makes sense.
So if you can help with things like poverty and lack of opportunity,
Yeah.
that's how you stop these groups from growing.
So helping the Afghan people isn't just the right thing to do.
Right.
It's also a way to make the region more stable in the long run.
Exactly. Now, the second solution is a little more complicated.
Okay.
International cooperation to combat terrorism. Sounds good on paper, right?
Right.
But the problem
They're
is
not that easy.
you need a lot of trust and coordination,
Yeah.
which is tough to get in a region with so much history.
I hear you. It's like all the countries are rivals and they all have their own goals.
Exactly. But terrorism doesn't care about borders.
Right.
What happens in Afghanistan affects its neighbors,
Especially Pakistan.
right? So this international cooperation would need to include helping Pakistan fight terrorism.
So things like sharing intelligence and maybe training their security forces. Yeah.
Exactly. And maybe even doing joint military operations against terrorist groups.
That's a lot to ask.
Yeah.
But it seems like it's necessary. What about the third solution? How do you even begin to stop these weapons from getting into the wrong hands? It seems impossible.
It's a huge task. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But experts have suggested using disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration programs.
DDR.
Yeah, DDR. It's
Yeah.
basically a three-part approach.
Okay, remind me how that works.
First, you disarm former fighters.
Okay.
So in this case, that could be people who were part of the Taliban, but maybe aren't happy with the new government,
Right.
or people who just want out.
I see.
So you take the weapons away. That's step one.
What about step 2?
Then you help these people go back to civilian life.
How do you do that?
You can give them job training, help them find work, or even offer counseling to deal with any trauma they might have.
So you're giving them a second chance.
Exactly. A chance to get away from violence and build a new life.
That's great. And what's the last step?
The last step is reintegration, helping them become productive members of society.
Okay.
Helping them get back in touch with their families, finding them homes and health care,
Right.
making sure they have access to education and opportunities to rebuild their lives.
That sounds like a really good approach.
It is.
But wouldn't it be really hard to do that in Afghanistan right now?
You're not wrong to be skeptical. It would be a massive project, and there would be a lot of challenges.
Like what?
Well, first of all, you would need the Taliban to agree to it.
Right. Because they're in control now.
Exactly. And their track record on human rights and their willingness to work with other countries,
Not great.
let's just say it's not very encouraging.
Right.
Then there's the problem of actually doing it.
Yeah.
Afghanistan is a big mountainous country,
Yeah.
and they don't have much infrastructure. So getting to remote communities, finding all the weapons, providing training and support,
Yeah.
it would take a lot of people and a lot of money.
And that's if other countries even want to pay for it.
Right. Which, given the state of the world, is not a sure thing.
Yeah, I get it.
So DDR in Afghanistan is a long shot.
Yeah.
But some experts think it's still worth trying, even if it just works in some areas.
So it's a glimmer of hope even if it's a small one.
Exactly.
Hmm?
But even if DDR worked perfectly in Afghanistan,
Yeah.
we'd still have a problem with these weapons crossing borders.
Oh,
Yeah.
right, because this is a regional issue.
Right. So you need a regional solution. And that's where other countries have to step up.
Okay, so what can they do?
Well, for starters, they can work together to track where these weapons are going.
Okay.
That means sharing information, keeping an eye on black markets,
Right.
maybe even doing joint operations to stop shipments.
So it's like a game of whack-a-mole.
Kind of,
Mm-hmm.
but with really dangerous weapons.
Right.
But it's more than just stopping the weapons. It's also about trying to fix the problems that make people want these weapons in the first place.
Yeah, like poverty and political instability.
Right? And all the criminal gangs who make money from this.
So it's a really complicated problem.
It is. It's a multifaceted problem that needs a comprehensive and coordinated response.
So you're saying there's no easy answer.
I'm afraid not. This is one of those situations where there are no quick fixes or magic bullets.
Right.
It needs long-term commitment, sustained effort, and a willingness to address all the things that are causing this crisis.
It makes me think of that quote. You can't solve a problem with the same thinking that created it.
Exactly. We need a new way of thinking about these problems.
And that's where our listeners come in, right?
Absolutely.
Or you're talking directly to them now.
This isn't just a thought experiment. This is a real problem with real consequences.
Right.
And understanding those consequences, wrestling with all the complicated parts of it,
Yeah.
that's the first step to finding solutions.
So you're saying knowledge is power?
It's more than that. It's a responsibility. We all have a role to play in fixing these global problems.
I agree, but what can our listeners do? We've given them a lot of information, and it's not exactly a happy story. What's the next step?
That's where things get really interesting.
Oh, okay. I can't wait to hear about it.
Well, think of this deep dive as a starting point. We've given you the basics,
Yeah.
but now it's your turn to take over.
Yeah.
The research we looked at mentioned specific types of weapons that were left behind.
Right, like night vision goggles and communication equipment.
Exactly. And maybe even anti-aircraft systems.
Yeah, we talked about that earlier.
But there's more to learn here.
Oh, really? Like what?
What are the exact models of these weapons?
Okay.
How do they work?
Right.
How easy is it to teach someone to use them? How could terrorist groups use them?
That's a good point. We didn't really get into the details.
No, we didn't.
So we should learn more about the actual hardware.
Exactly.
What else?
Remember those ripple effects we talked about?
Yeah.
Well, we focused on Pakistan,
Right.
but this affects the whole region. What do the other countries think about this? What are they worried about?
Yeah, that's true. We didn't really talk about that.
No, we didn't.
Yeah.
So how are they dealing with this new situation?
It's like this whole thing is a puzzle.
Yeah.
And every time you find one piece,
Yeah.
it just gets more complicated.
That's what makes it so fascinating. It's not just about finding answers.
Right.
It's about asking better questions.
I like that.
It's about questioning what you think you know, looking at things from different angles,
Right.
and then forming your own opinion.
So you're saying our listeners should take what they've learned and go do their own research.
Exactly.
Become part of the conversation.
Exactly. Don't just read the headlines.
Okay.
Dig deeper. Look at the research. Get different perspectives.
Don't just accept what you hear.
Right. Question everything, analyze it, and then come to your own conclusions.
I love that. Don't just consume information. Think about it.
Exactly.
But then what? What do we do with all this thinking?
Well, that's up to you, isn't it?
What do you mean?
Knowledge without action is useless.
Okay.
It's like a seed that never gets planted.
Mm.
Maybe after this deep dive, you'll feel inspired to write to your representatives or support groups that are working on the ground in Afghanistan. Or even just have more informed conversations with your friends and family.
So this isn't just about becoming an expert on the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan.
Right.
It's about taking what you've learned and using it to make a difference in the world.
Exactly. Even if it's a small difference.
So it's about realizing that we're all connected,
Yeah.
that what happens in one place can affect everyone else,
Right.
and that we all have a responsibility to pay attention to these problems, to learn about them, to think critically about them,
Yeah.
and to try to make things better.
Exactly.
You've really brought it full circle. We started by talking about one specific event,
Yeah.
and now we're talking about everyone's responsibility to build a better future.
And that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Understanding the past, dealing with the present, and using that knowledge to create a more just and fair world. It's a journey, not a destination.
I like that.
And I'm glad you've all decided to join us on this journey.
Me too. Well
Yeah.
said. I think that's the perfect place to stop for today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep thinking about all of this, and we'll catch you on the next one.
See ya. Yeah, he's painting a pretty grim picture, actually. He's warning of a potential surge in terrorism and instability across the whole region,
Wow.
all fueled by this power vacuum and all these weapons that are just up for grabs. It's a recipe for disaster.
It really is. And it's not just Pakistan that's at risk here, right?
No, not at all.
Oh, yeah.
Think about it. The U.S. withdrawal created a void,
Yeah.
and somebody's going to fill it.
Right.
So now you've got all these different groups trying to take control.
Like who?
Regional powers, militant groups, criminal networks. They're all fighting for influence, and all these weapons are like currency in this new landscape.
So it's like a powder keg just waiting to explode.
Pretty much.
And nobody knows who's going to light the fuse.
Yeah, it's a scary situation.
So what can we do about it? Is there any way out of this mess?
That's the million-dollar question. The research we've got here does offer some potential solutions,
Okay.
but they all come with their own set of challenges.
Well, let's hear them. I'm always up for brainstorming.
Okay, the first one is pretty straightforward, at least in theory.
All right, I'm listening.
International support for the Afghan people.
Okay.
I mean, they're facing a humanitarian crisis of epic proportions.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Decades of conflict, followed by a brutal regime change. Economic collapse. It's a nightmare.
Yeah, basic necessities are in short supply. Healthcare is almost non-existent in some areas. And the education system is in shambles.
Exactly. They're desperate for help.
Heartbreaking.
And it's not just about being compassionate. It's strategic, too. When people are desperate, They're more susceptible to recruitment by extremist groups.
That makes sense.
If you address the root causes of instability like poverty and lack of opportunity,
Right.
then you can prevent these groups from growing.
So helping the Afghan people is not just a humanitarian act.
No.
It's an investment in regional stability.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, the second solution is a little more complicated.
Okay, let's hear it.
International cooperation to combat terrorism.
That sounds tough.
It does. It sounds great on paper, but the reality is...
Yeah, you need a lot of trust and coordination.
Right. And that's hard to come by in a region with so much history of conflict and rivalry.
Yeah, it's like trying to get a bunch of cats to work together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the thing is, terrorism doesn't respect borders.
True.
What happens in Afghanistan has a direct impact on its neighbors.
Especially Pakistan.
Right. So this international cooperation would have to include support for Pakistan's counterterrorism efforts.
So things like sharing intelligence and maybe providing training and resources to their security forces?
Exactly. And maybe even conducting joint military operations against terrorist groups.
That's a tall order, but it sounds necessary.
It does. And then there's the third solution.
Okay.
Preventing these weapons from falling into the wrong hands.
Yeah, how do you even begin to do that? It seems impossible.
It's a monumental task, no doubt. But experts have suggested disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration programs, or DDR, as a potential way forward.
DDR. I've heard of that, but I'm not sure I totally understand it.
It's basically a three-pronged approach.
Okay.
First, you disarm former combatants.
Okay.
In this case, that could include members of the Taliban who might not be fully on board with the new regime, or even those who are disillusioned and want out.
So you get the weapons off the streets. That's step one.
Right. Then comes demobilization.
Okay.
You help these individuals transition back into civilian life.
How do you do that?
It could involve vocational training, helping them find jobs, or even offering psychological support to deal with the trauma they may have experienced.
It's like giving them a second chance.
Exactly. A path away from violence and toward a more stable future. And then the final stage, reintegration, is all about helping them become productive members of society.
That sounds great.
It does.
But would it actually work in Afghanistan given the current situation?
Well, you're right to be skeptical. It would be a massive undertaking, fraught with challenges.
What kind of challenges?
For starters, you need the cooperation of the Taliban, who now control the country, and their track record on human rights, and their willingness to work with the international community. Let's just say it's not exactly encouraging.
That's putting it mildly. What else?
Well, then there's the logistics of it all. Afghanistan is a vast mountainous country with limited infrastructure.
Right.
Reaching remote communities, tracking down weapons, providing training and support.
Yeah.
It would be a huge logistical challenge. It would require a massive influx of resources and personnel.
And that's assuming the international community is even willing to fit the bill.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which, given the current global climate, is a big if.
Yeah.
So yeah, DDR in Afghanistan is a long shot.
It sounds like it.
But some experts argue that it's still worth exploring, even if it's just a partial solution in certain areas.
So it's not a perfect solution, but it's something.
Exactly. But even if DDR were to work perfectly in Afghanistan, we'd still have a problem with these weapons flowing across borders.
That's true. This is a regional issue.
Right. And it requires a regional solution. That's where the international community has a crucial role to play.
What kind of role? What can they do?
Well, for starters, they can work together to track the flow of these weapons.
Okay.
This involves sharing intelligence, monitoring black markets, and even potentially conducting joint operations to intercept these shipments.
It sounds incredibly difficult.
It is, but it's more than just stopping the immediate flow. It's also about addressing the underlying factors that drive the demand for these weapons.
So things like poverty and political instability and the presence of criminal networks who profit from this trade.
Exactly. It's a multifaceted problem that requires a comprehensive and coordinated response.
It all sounds very daunting. Are you saying there's no easy fix here?
I'm afraid not. This is one of those situations where there are no quick wins or silver bullet solutions. It requires long-term commitment, sustained effort, and a willingness to address the complex web of interconnected issues that fuel this crisis.
It seems like we need a whole new way of thinking about these challenges.
I couldn't agree more. And that's where you, our listener, come in.
Wait, you're talking to our listener directly now.
Absolutely. This isn't just a theoretical exercise. This is a real-world issue with real-world consequences.
Right.
And understanding those consequences, grappling with the complexities, that's the first step towards finding solutions.
So knowledge is power.
More than that, it's a responsibility. We all have a role to play in addressing these global challenges, even if it's just by staying informed and engaging in meaningful conversations.
I agree with that. But where does our listener go from here? We've given them a lot to think about, and it's not exactly a happy story. So what's the next step?
That's where things get really interesting. Well, think of this whole deep dive as a starting point.
Well, okay.
We've given you the basics, but now it's your turn to take over. Remember all that research we talked about?
Yeah.
It mentioned specific types of weapons that were left behind.
Right, like night vision goggles and communication equipment and maybe even anti-aircraft systems.
Exactly. And there's more to learn here.
Okay, like what kind of stuff?
Well, like what are the exact models of these weapons? How do they work? How easy is it to train someone to use them? And how could terrorist groups use them?
You're right. We didn't really get into the nitty-gritty of all that.
And remember those ripple effects we talked about?
Yeah, those are pretty scary.
We focused a lot on Pakistan.
Right.
But this affects the whole region.
It does.
So what do the other countries think about all this? What are they worried about? How are they dealing with this new situation?
Yeah, it's like we only looked at one piece of the puzzle.
Exactly.
And there's a whole lot more to see.
And that's what I love about this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's not just about finding answers. It's about asking better questions.
That's a good point.
Challenge what you think. Look at things from different angles. And then form your own opinions.
So you're saying our listeners should take what they've learned and go do their own research.
Exactly. Become part of the conversation. Don't just read the headlines. Dig deeper. Look at the research. Get different perspectives.
Don't just accept what you hear.
Right. Question everything. Analyze it.
Yeah.
And then come to your own conclusions.
I love that. Don't just consume information. Think about it.
Exactly.
But then what? What do we do with all that thinking?
Well, that's up to you, isn't it? Knowledge without action is like a seed that never gets planted. So maybe after this deep dive, you'll feel inspired to write to your representatives.
Okay.
Or support groups that are working on the ground in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Or even just have more informed conversations with your friends and family.
So this isn't just about becoming an expert on the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan.
No, it's not.
It's about using what you've learned to make the world a better place.
Exactly. Even if it's just a small change.
It's about realizing that we're all connected and that what happens in one place can affect everyone else.
Yeah, and that we all have a responsibility to try to make things better.
To learn about these problems, to think about them, and to take action.
Absolutely.
You've really given us a lot to think about. We started by talking about one specific event, and now we're talking about our responsibility to create a better future for everyone.
That's what it's all about, right? Understanding the past, dealing with the present, and building a brighter future.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Exactly.
And I'm so glad that all of our listeners have joined us on this journey.
Me too.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to wrap things up for today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep those wheels turning, and we'll catch you on the next one.
See you then.